Allen Lund Company wishes all the owner-operators out there a Happy New Year. OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
The Federal Trade Commission had been planning to do something about predatory towing fees, but a final rule left the trucking industry in the dark. Jamie Jones of Landline Magazine discusses what changed. You have a chance now to send FMCSA a message about broker transparency, and OOIDA is calling on all members to act now. OOIDA President Todd Spencer and Executive Vice President Louis Pugh are holding a fireside chat next week to get everyone prepared. A number of big trucking stories have broken over the past few weeks, from whiplash over beneficial ownership information to New York City congestion pricing and more. Tyson Fisher and Mark Schirmer of Landline Magazine join Scott Thompson for a recap and analysis. And finally, Marty Ellis has seen some of what he calls ELD damage. That's not damage to ELDs, but rather damage to other things by truckers who were too pressed for time because of their ELD. I'll talk with the man who drives the spirit of the American trucker. And now, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to spend a little time talking about predatory towing now and the lack of action on the federal level to address it so far, at least. The Federal Trade Commission was squaring itself up to do something, but they changed course. Joining us with analysis is Jamie Jones of Landline Magazine. Jamie, good to see you.
Hey, it's good to be here, Scott.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
So let's take a step back at what the Federal Trade Commission had been planning to do with regard to predatory towing. And make no mistake, they were kind of talking about doing something, but then we'll get into what they eventually did do. But what was the initial plan there?
Well, and we have to go back into 2023, the end of 2023, okay? And that's when the Federal Trade Commission came out with a proposal that would prohibit unfair or deceptive practices relating to fees for goods, services, all that stuff.
Junk fees,
yes.
That kind of thing, yep.
So what was really cool about this, and it was something that in my time covering trucking, I haven't seen this before, but FMCSA jumped on board on this one and actually filed comments in support of the FTC's proposal, and with the intention that this would help FMCSA address predatory towing and, you know, the inflated fees and everything. So all of the screaming, yelling, pleading, begging, whatever has happened, FMCSA listened, and they understand that there is a problem with predatory towing out there. So that was really encouraging to see that end of 2023, early 2024, when FMCSA jumped on this and said, yes, we're going to, we want this. Mm-hmm. And so fast forward to the end of 2024, FTC comes out with their proposal again, and they had scaled it back so bad. I mean, it still is aiming to tackle deceptive fees, but they put it so narrow in scope that FMCSA would not be able to use that to address predatory towing fees. So it was, kind of a wonk.
Yeah, it was promising. We thought maybe it was going to, be in there, and then it just vanished. It wasn't there.
Yeah, and especially when you had another agency saying, hey, this will help us.
And it will help a lot of people.
Yes,
yeah.
You would have thought that comment alone would have carried some significant weight. I just, because you don't routinely see agencies commenting on other agencies' proposals. So I think we were a little Pollyanna optimistic, thinking that this was going to be a move in the right direction. But no, November came and went, and FTC scaled it back, and it's really not going to be any help on this particular problem.
Yeah, so swing and a miss from FTC there. We didn't get what we were hoping we might get. You did touch on something, though, that I think is important to note, that FMCSA does recognize this as a big problem. They have said as much. They held a public forum, a meeting over the summer, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. Got a lot of feedback from a lot of people, essentially it told us what we already know, that this predatory towing issue is a massive problem. And FMCSA does have some things in the works here. We'll see how that process plays out. But it is encouraging that they do see this as a problem, and they are thinking at least about doing something. What that looks like, we don't know.
Yeah, when you have an agency, again, they jumped on that chance that they had with the FTC, but then we also had this public meeting in June, and Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, was part of that meeting, and he even acknowledged the problem with predatory towing. So when you have an agency recognizing it, you have the Secretary of Transportation recognizing it, you've made some traction. But I love how Doug Morris, our OOIDA Director of State and Government Affairs, put it. He said, let's not check a box and say we had another meeting. Let's do something about it. So, leave it to Doug to keep the heat cranked up on him, and that's what's got to happen. Everybody can recognize it's a problem, but we can't sit here, holding our hands out going, well, but we don't know what to do. We have to find a solution.
Well, and this is the thing, too, with the change in administrations on January 20th, we have seen some momentum and at least an acknowledgement of this problem, I think, over the past few years. And it feels like that kind of awareness is growing. Hopefully now that will continue on with the new administration, and hopefully they recognize that this issue is an issue as well, and we'll find ways to tackle it and keep up the work that we've been seeing on this issue in particular, because it has been encouraging. In the meantime, as we wait for something on the federal level, we're looking at the states. It may be something that goes a bit more quickly on the state level, because they are able to kind of move a little more quickly. Missouri is a good example of this. They've been looking at this issue for a number of years now, and we have a new governor coming in the next couple weeks, I think, here, and a new bill has been introduced in Missouri as well.
Yeah. So we've had a bill that has been introduced in 2 previous sessions of the state legislature and got to the point of being signed by the governor. So we got it out of the state legislature, and the governor vetoed both times. And you have to wonder what special interest group is in his ear to do that. So yes, with him leaving office, we have a third attempt at it. And there's some momentum with incoming lawmakers at the state level paying attention to this issue. We have a new governor, so it's a fresh slate in that regard that we can hopefully get it across the finish line and get a governor's signature on it. The thing that you have to keep in mind when you leave it up to states to address these issues, we're going to have a patchwork.
Right.
And, some states are going to have really, really good protective laws on the books, and others are going to be the Wild West with nothing. So that's why, that we get traction in these states and can solve some of these problems, and other groups are working in states to do the same thing. But it comes down ultimately that what we need is like a federal minimum standard.
Right, yeah.
And, that way the states will have a template, if you will, to work off of, that they could put in these state laws to really put some teeth on this problem, because everybody loses on predatory towing fees. Insurance companies, that jacks up other people's rates.
Even the towing companies have said that they're bearing the brunt of people who aren't paying.
The unreputable companies are really struggling. So it's something that we have to keep the focus on. Hopefully we might even get some legislation introduced at the federal level. I just know it's an issue that is near and dear to OOIDA's heart, and they're fighting hard on it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, too, reach out to your state lawmakers and let them know that this is an issue and maybe something that they can take up on the state level as well. Keep that relationship, keep that line open, I should say.
100%.
There you go. Jamie, we appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Oh, you're welcome, Scott.
More details on this story on landline.media. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Next, we'll hear about an upcoming fireside chat about broker transparency from Todd Spencer and Louis Pugh of OOIDA, and Tyson Fisher and Mark Schirmer of Landline Magazine catch us up on the news of the week. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on TruckStop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Welcome back to the show. We've been telling you in recent weeks about the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's efforts to bring about more transparency and more fairness to the brokerage industry. OOIDA has been on the front lines of this fight for quite some time now, and the association is still there. They're holding a fireside chat next week to get truckers engaged. We'll talk about that now, among other things, with OOIDA President Todd Spencer and OOIDA Executive Vice President Louis Pugh. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Glad to.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to have you here. I want to talk about the fireside chat on January 8th. I want to talk about OOIDA's call to action on the broker transparency proposal. But first, I want to hear from both of you about the rulemaking itself. We haven't talked to you specifically about it. There are 4 specific provisions in it for those who have been busy working, perhaps busy spending time with family over the holidays. Can you kind of explain for us what this rulemaking in particular would do to address the problems that people are encountering out there?
Well, I'd have to say the core issue with the issue between truckers and brokers is transparency. I mean, the details of the entire arrangement. Now, this isn't complex stuff. It isn't new stuff. We're not asking for new regulations. The regulations for transparency have been on the books since 1980. 80!
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
However, they're not being enforced, right?
Well, look, brokers have simply not complied. They've simply blown off the rule. They've blown off the requirements for all of these years. And no matter complaints, they've found ways to become not in greater compliance, but even less compliance, and to find clever ways to try to evade any legitimate efforts for compliance. And, enough is enough. All of these issues came to a head 4 years ago because of COVID and because of COVID's impact on what was going on with trucking and with truckers. And, we watched truckers go to D.C. out in front of the White House. And the issue that they were there focused specifically on was the lack of transparency in the relationships that they had between carriers and brokers. And it's, look, over 4 decades, it's time for some compliance. And this is our effort to, in essence, elevate the issue and get the agency to take some real steps to remedy this issue. Again, asking for transparency is not asking for a lot. I mean, it's just we're talking about honesty, candor, relationships. And, it's not like brokers don't have a role in transportation. They do, an important role. But this is an effort to separate the good from the bad, and a legitimate effort.
Yeah. And it's not complex stuff like you said there. A couple of the provisions are making sure that brokers keep an electronic record of these transactions and making them available to a carrier, I think, within 48 hours if a carrier requests it. Louis, as you look at this, and as Todd kind of pointed out here, these regulations have been there. Compliance has not been. Enforcement has not been as well. How far would this particular transparency proposal go toward fixing? It's not going to fix all the problems, we know that, but how far would it go toward fixing some of the problems that we're seeing out there?
Well, to go a lot further than we went before because we haven't been doing anything.
Yeah.
I mean, some of that, of course, remains to be seen. I think, the one thing that's lacking there, and this is why it's real important for truckers to file comments, is how this is going to be enforced, what's going to happen. It'd be nice to have some of that in there. The one thing we were hoping to get in there was that they had to produce this just automatically. You'll still have to request it. And so we're a little disappointed it wasn't that. And the reason we wanted it to just automatic is because what we hear from our members and carriers is they're afraid to ask for this information because they're afraid they'll get blacklisted. And so, and we understand that. But there comes a time you got to stand up for what's right. And this may be the time if we get this across the finish line. And the other thing that's a little concerning, they didn't really address, the one big issue you see out here is that brokers are requiring motor carriers to waive their right to 371.3 in their broker carrier agreements. Now, we do not believe that any business entity has the right to ask another business entity to waive the right to any kind of federal regulation. And that really wasn't addressed either. So that's another thing that needs to be put in comments. And you know what I'd like to say here, because we get feedback both pro and con. And I think we all know what the pros are, but the cons that we hear from members is it's their business, it's their thing, why we want this, why are we wanting new legislations. As Todd said, this is not a new rule. This is a rule that's been out there. It's been there for the 80s, so we're not asking for anything new. As a trucker, you have a right to know these things. And I think what happens is with some members and some truckers, fortunately, they've not had a problem. Where this really gets into play, and we see this weekly here, is carrier hauls a load, delivers a load, they get a signed bill of lading, everything's clean, good, happy, and they leave. And then a month or so goes by and they get a bill from the broker saying that there was a claim on this load. Carrier wants to know what the claim is, and the broker tells them, well, we don't have to tell you, you just owe us $1,500. And you've waived your right of knowing what all the problems are and all this stuff. Yeah. And that's when stuff like this really becomes an issue, and you have nothing to prove or nothing to show. And unfortunately, you get stuck because what these brokers also put in their contract is they can do cross-collateralization and stuff like that, so they can hold your money from other loads and stuff like that. So it becomes a real sticky mess for the carrier. So even if you haven't had a problem, and hopefully you never have a problem, this is a way to help give you some added protection. And then, of course, the whole electronic thing comes down to is you're a motor carrier, you pick up a load in Pennsylvania, you live in Ohio, you deliver it to Florida, but the broker's in California, and he's like, well, we'll show you, but you have to come out to our office. Well,
Sure.
that isn't
Yeah.
feasible.
Super easy.
Yeah. So that's not feasible.
Yeah.
Everybody
And they know
knows that. And they know it.
Yeah.
And come on. We do everything electronically now. They sign broker carrier agreements and stuff all the time electronically. So there's no reason we can't do this electronically as well.
This may all have been around since the 80s. We're not in the 1980s anymore. Obviously, there are ways to communicate that weren't available in the 1980s. Just in general, Todd.
Well, wait a minute. Let me point something else too. This isn't just about truckers and brokers. This is all parties to the transaction, and that includes shippers, receivers, and anyone else that may have been involved. And the idea behind transparency is that without transparency, you can't really resolve problem issues. You can't fairly resolve claims issues for any particular reason. If there's any kind of a problem that shows up, this is something that just totally subverts any kind of meaningful and fair resolution. So again, this is a rule that was on the books for a good reason at the time, and that reason hasn't changed.
Yeah.
That hasn't changed. I mean, without having access to accurate information, you'll never fairly resolve anything. And, that comes up in all areas of business.
Yeah. Let's talk about this fireside chat a little bit because it's taking place on Wednesday, January 8th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. I know that OOIDA has done some of these kinds of things before. I think it's been a while, though. I'm curious why. So what's the idea behind this fireside chat? What are you hoping to do, obviously, in the context of this broker transparency proposal? What are you looking to accomplish here?
I think first and foremost, we want to educate members. This is kind of we've done a couple of these things in the past. We're going to try to do more of this. Also, it gives us an opportunity to hear back from members. Todd's going to speak. I'll speak. Jay Grimes, our head of regulatory affairs out in D.C., is going to be a part of this fireside chat, kind of give people the information, the whys, the reason, the history, all that stuff, how to give comments. And then also there'll be time that people can send questions in if you have a question or information or something like that you want to add as well. Because, we put a lot of information out there, which is good, and that's what we want to do to keep our members and truckers informed. But sometimes we don't get as much information back, and we want to hear what if you don't understand something or have a question, we want to hear those things.
Yeah, for sure.
And obviously, we also want to encourage truckers to engage on the issue, to communicate, to share their thoughts with FMCSA. And, with our fightingfortruckers.com website, we make it really, really, really easy to have access to all of the relevant information and to communicate directly with FMCSA. Now, we don't have, in essence, a sample letter per se, simply because we want truckers to say how this issue affects them. And in their own words, that is most compelling. Comments don't have to be long. They don't have to be in-depth. They can be specific. And, the more specific, the better. The issues that you encounter in instances where you ask for this transparency. What happens? What do the brokers do? What are the threats that they make? Let's talk about the real issues that affect real truckers every day. That's how we resolve some of these things.
Yeah, I think at last check there were a couple thousand comments on this already, which is a good number, but I always think back to the speed limiter proposal when there were, I think, 15,000 comments, which I really do think had a role in kind of pushing that thing off and, down the line.
Sure. 100%.
And it can have the opposite effect, I guess, with this, in that if enough people speak up and tell FMCSA what a problem this is, it may spur them to act faster. That's kind of the idea here as well, right, Louis?
100%. I mean, if you want, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease in Washington, D.C. And that's the one thing I want to say, because I have been on a couple other shows talking about this and stuff, and people have called in or messaged in and said, well, it doesn't matter anyway, because they never listen to truckers. They're going to listen to the brokers over us. Let me remind you, we wouldn't be where we are right now with the opportunity to make comments if they listened to the brokers, because the brokers don't want comments. They didn't want anything. They could have very easily come out and FMCSA and said, we're not doing anything with this petition, and it just went away. So they have made a proposed rulemaking. So now's your chance to give your side of the story. As Todd said, tell how this could affect you, how maybe problems you've had in the past. And if you don't have anything, if nothing else, just get on there. You can get on there as easily and say, hey, I support this, or I support this, but I'd like to see this or this added. The things we talked about earlier. So it's very easy. Fightingfortruckers.com. You can go on there and comment in just a couple minutes, and you can do it from your cell phone. It's very cell phone friendly as well. And yeah, we need 15, 20, 30, 50,000 comments would be fabulous. I mean, there's way more truckers out there than there are brokers. So keep that in mind. This is your opportunity to be heard.
Yeah. Hey, and actually, the brokers have actually weighed in on this topic. They petitioned the agency to do away with this rule completely. And the agency said, nah.
Which should tell you something, right? If
Right.
they're fighting
absolutely.
this.
Well, again, this is not just an issue between truckers and brokers. This is an issue of basic transparency, fairness, and efficiency in the whole system.
Right.
No matter, from time to time, things will come up with any kind of a shipment. And if we're going to have the best transportation system we have an efficient way and a fair way to deal with problems when they pop up. And, hey, let's go on.
Yeah. We should mention that the deadline to submit those comments is January 21st. And I think you've both laid out, what commenting looks like and why it's important. But if anybody has any questions or concerns or whatever, that fireside chat on January 8th on Wednesday would be a good opportunity to do that. And that's what you're looking for, right?
Yep, and you can catch it live on Wednesday evening. As you said with the times, it's 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. Also, if you do miss it, we will be rebroadcasting. There'll be places you'll be able to catch it on social later. Or if you have questions and no other way, call in here to OOIDA, reach out, and we're more than happy to chat with you.
Yeah, 816-229-5791 is the phone number there. Landlinenow.com. We're going to have links to how to comment, information about the fireside chat, and everything else there that can help you. Fightingfortruckers.com as well. It's a great resource for doing that as well. Louis, Todd, always a pleasure. We appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Todd Spencer and Louis Pugh. I'm Scott Thompson, and Landline Now returns right after this.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, Look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Capital Reman, the leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, has partnered with OOIDA to offer exclusive member benefits. Visit CapitalReman.com today to support America's transportation industry and take advantage of your benefits.
Welcome back to Landline Now. Despite the holidays, there's been quite a bit of trucking news in the headlines, from confusion about beneficial ownership information filings to congestion pricing and more. It's time to run down all the latest with the help of Mark Schirmer and Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine. Mark, Tyson, Happy New Year. Good to see you.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Let's start, Tyson, with this beneficial ownership information reporting requirement. Pretty sure you got whiplash over the last week of 2024, because at one moment the courts had nixed the requirement, then it was back on and off. Super hard to keep track of where we stand now, I think, even then. But walk us through kind of the confusion, the frustrating journey, as it were, Tyson.
Yeah, as you pointed out, this is a confusing situation. So let's kind of go back just a little bit. So on December 3rd, a Texas federal district court pretty much filed or put an order for a nationwide injunction on beneficial ownership information. So what that means is that nobody had to file BOI reports. That was going to be due January 1st for most for companies. And so that was the way it was going to be. And then just fast forward real quick to December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas, and everyone got a lovely gift of that. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overruled that district court injunction, which means that the BOI report is now back in the books for January 1st, just about, like a week before.
Right.
And then fast forward the day after Christmas, just 3 days later, and then a different panel for the same Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said, nah, just kidding. We were just
just joshing.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
But yeah, it was a different panel, and then it put the nationwide injunction back into play. That is where we are at right now. And so if you don't listen to anything I say, listen to this part, which is beneficial ownership information reporting. It is not required right now as of this conversation. I checked the official website, which is finsin.gov, and they have said as much, which is you do not have to report on this. They do encourage companies to file a report voluntarily. Because this can change at any moment, as we have seen in recent weeks. So yeah, their advice is, if you're not just absolutely opposed to the idea of a BOI report, maybe just file it, because it really is, all you're doing is that you're submitting some information about you and your company. It takes less than an hour to do it. It's very easy to do. There is no filing fee. It's just a quick little data entry is all you're doing, and then you're done with it. That's all you got to do. And so, yeah.
And I'm sure there's people out there who did actually file when they thought this thing was on, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, I've talked to an individual driver back and forth over this past 2 weeks while this has been going on, and what he's kept on, he's asking, okay, is this on? Is it off? What am I supposed to do? And I think, within that, at one of the points, he just went ahead and got it filed. He talked to his attorney and got it filed. But yeah, but there's a lot of people that think it's overly intrusive, and so if you land in that side of it, right now, like Tyson said, you don't have to do it. So you can't hold off, but be paying attention,
right?
Because once they do put it into effect, if they do, those penalties and fines for not being filed are pretty substantial once that goes into effect.
Yeah, and I understand the concerns too. The U.S. Treasury Department was hacked, I think, by Chinese hackers recently. So I understand, the reticence to maybe kind of put this information out there. But good point there, because the whiplash will probably continue. At some point, we're probably going to see this thing go back into effect, perhaps, and maybe. Who knows? We'll see what happens. This is probably a good example of the ways in which government isn't the most efficient when you've got this kind of back and forth.
Sure.
But in some cases, things can go pretty quickly. Mark, a bill called the Transportation Security Screening Modernization Act, previously introduced in both chambers of Congress, has been signed into law by President Biden. First, some background on this bill. It's pretty simple, and the goal of this is to simplify things, right?
Yeah. So basically, truckers on hazmat, threat assessments and those type of background checks where basically there was a lot of redundancy. They're paying for those things multiple times. And so now we've just reduced it, streamlined it down to one thing. You talk about inefficiency of government. And this is such a breath of fresh air because it was a bipartisan bill. It was introduced by Republicans, signed by Democratic President Biden into law. And it's also, even in the trucking industry, everybody kind of just called it common sense. That OOIDA called it common sense. ATA also supported it. International Brotherhood of Teamsters also supported it. That's not that often when you get all those things together, everybody saying something. And it's basically because it is common sense. It's not making it any more likely for any sort of threat to bleed in. It's just reducing the redundancy and, costs that shouldn't fall down to the truck driver.
Yeah, again, there were separate applications for TWIC, for Transportation Worker Identification Credential, hazardous materials endorsements, that kind of thing. Security threat assessments already made for those. Now, instead of having to do separate applications, it's all kind of lumped into one. So this is an example of government,
everybody sang Kumbaya and everybody was happy. It was great.
World peace is next. Let's hope. Yeah, so good news there, and I'm sure this will affect, quite a few people out there who are listening and make their lives a little bit easier, which is a good thing. Let's talk. We'll go back on the other side of this pendulum, I guess, here. New York City congestion pricing. Speaking of whiplash, This was another thing from 2024 that kind of went back and forth. It was pulled over the summer by Governor Kathy Hochul. She really fast-tracked this thing near the end of 2024, and it's back on now.
Yeah, it is back on. So, on Sunday, January 5th, congestion pricing will begin south of 60th Street in Manhattan, New York, as of this conversation.
Okay, yeah.
This is another situation similar to the beneficial ownership information with the 11th hour court ruling. So, on December 30th, what happened was a federal court judge in the New Jersey courtroom basically ruled on New Jersey's federal lawsuit. So real quick, there's about 9 federal lawsuits challenging congestion pricing, all but 2 of which are in a New York federal court. These 2 are in New Jersey. So the New York lawsuits, the judges have found that basically dismissed most of their claims. The New Jersey case had yet to be filed or to be ruled on until recently, when the court basically said dismissed basically all but one of New Jersey's claims, which New Jersey complained about unfair. So basically what happened was that during when this was all being figured out, the Federal Highway Administration gave the Bronx a certain amount of money, but they didn't give any New Jersey cities a certain specific amount of money to mitigate the increase in traffic. So basically the argument here was, why did you give special attention to New York cities but not New Jersey cities that are affected? And so what the federal judge said is, good point. The federal government has 2 weeks to file something with the courts to kind of give us an explanation as to why there's that discrepancy between New Jersey cities versus New York cities. That being said, that was December 30th. On that same day, both New York and New Jersey claimed victory in that court ruling, with New York saying, well, we won, so we're going to move forward with congestion pricing on January 5th. And New Jersey attorney said, yeah, no, we won. And so therefore, congestion pricing has to be paused until we resolve this issue that this court recognized. So kind of make this already long story short, congestion pricing will begin on January 5th, okay?
Probably.
But New Jersey filed an emergency motion for clarification and preliminary injunction. So we are recording this on Friday morning, on January 3rd. The court is going to have a hearing on that at 3 p.m. on Friday to rule on that. Every indication is that the court is going to say, congestion pricing can move forward while we settle this issue. That being said, I know that the last of the filings are due in mid-February, so we might not have an actual answer to the question until maybe towards the end of February, maybe March. But until then, there's every indication that congestion pricing will move forward, and then that's the way it's going to be until the court says explicitly otherwise.
I guess if you're going to look for good news in this, it's that they did reduce the rates,
Yes.
right? By about 40%, I think, across the board. I can't remember the exact numbers, but
Yep.
the total for a heavy truck passing through this area was going to be pretty hefty. It's still pretty hefty, don't get me wrong,
Right.
but it is lower, right?
It's $21.60 to get into that area. And by the way, truckers will be charged every single time they enter and re-enter that zone, whereas passenger vehicles only have to pay it once a day. That's a whole different lawsuit that the Trucking Associations of New York is fighting against as well.
Okay, so maybe not good news, but it is less, I
There you
guess. But yeah, that is not good news by any means. But again, stay tuned to us. Check landline.media because you're keeping an eye on this and keeping updates going out there because this is another, again, example of whiplash there. Let's move to a couple other stories here real quick before we say goodbye for the moment here. Advanced Clean Trucks rules in effect in 5 states this year, Tyson, despite quite a bit of opposition, right?
Yeah, so there are some challenges to that, some legal challenges in the federal court. But again, with this, all you need to know is that in 5 states, I don't have it at the top of my head. I know it's New York, Washington, Oregon, Massachusetts, and I'm missing another one.
Yeah.
But at any rate, that is going to happen. There are efforts to put at least a 2-year delay on the implementation of advanced clean trucks. Every single one of those have been unsuccessful. And so in those states, basically what it means is that there has to be a 7% of new truck sales have to be zero emissions from the manufacturer side. That's being trickled down to the dealers, who are pretty much they're being forced to sell at least one electric truck before they can sell I think it's 200 or before they can buy 200 diesel trucks.
Yeah.
That's causing a lot of problems because some dealers are having trouble selling a single electric vehicle because there just is no demand for Class 8 zero emission tractors. So that's also a developing story. So we'll kind of see how some of these challenges are going to shape out in both the courtroom and in front of federal law or state lawmakers to do something about it.
We're going to give you an honorary law degree, Tyson, just because you've been tracking all this over the past several weeks. I mean, it's impressive, and I'm sure you've accumulated a few gray hairs. You look pretty good right now,
bit,
but
no, I'm good.
But doing all right. Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, and Washington are those 5 states that have put it into effect with the turn of the calendar into 2025. Real quick here before we go, Mark, broker transparency. We've talked about this, and we talked about this earlier with Louie and Todd. But the push to get comments out there, it's in full force.
Yeah, the stretch run is definitely in effect. January 21st is the deadline to file comments. Right now, there's about 2,000 filed. That's a great number so far, but at the same time, could use a lot more comments. When you consider this is an issue that goes back to truckers, hundreds of truck drivers going to Washington, D.C. protesting all the way back in May 2020. So we're finally here. President Trump will take office January 20th. The 21st, that's the day the deadline ends on it. So, he was back in 2020, gave some positive comments about this and said this was something that he would get done for truck drivers. And now it's right in front of him. So that would be, it's a great time to file those comments. And OOIDA is doing everything it can to help make that happen.
Yeah, that fireside chat again on January 8th, Wednesday at
7:30 Central.
Thank you for that. And 5:30 Pacific, obviously 8:30 Eastern, and the comments due on January 21st. We'll keep an eye on that. Tyson, Mark, we appreciate your time as always.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
You can check out Mark and Tyson's work each and every day on Landline.media and in every issue of Landline Magazine. We'll step out for a break, but stay close. We're back with more Landline Now in just a moment.
Running on ultra-low sulfur diesel? Stay protected this winter with Howe's Diesel Treat and Diesel Lifeline. Steer clear of gel and ice with North America's #1 trusted brand. Find Howe's products nationwide at select retailers, auto parts stores, truck stops, and on Amazon.com.
Truckdown.com. Whenever you have a breakdown, you need Truckdown.com. 24/7 access to 40,000 verified heavy-duty repair vendors nationwide.
Vendor choice. Owner-operators rejoice.
Truckdown.com.
Since you started, What you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Every week, we check in with Marty Ellis, who drives OOIDA's tour truck, the Spirit of the American Trucker. Marty has seen some of what he calls ELD damage, but he's not talking about damage to ELDs, but rather damage to infrastructure by truckers who are too pressed for time because of their ELD. I discussed that with Marty, as well as some of what he's hearing regarding a program that brings in workers from other countries.
Carolina west to Denver, up to Bangor, west to Austin, coast to coast, sea to sea, sail on, sail on.
Well, Marty, I guess Happy New Year's in order. We're now into the new year. How are you doing?
I am doing lovely, Mark. And yeah, I'm hoping you had a great New Year's. And so I was able to spend a lot of time with the family and just getting myself situated so we can get back out to work.
Well, there you go. Let's talk about some of the issues out there, because there is a lot going on right now. You had mentioned one in an email you sent over earlier about ELD damage, these electronic logging devices. What kind of damage are we talking about?
Well, it was kind of a play on words. One of our members stopped in and we were discussing some of the undertrained drivers out there, and all the damage along the, he pointed out the damage along the Pennsylvania roads out there, with damage to the barriers out there along the road. And you know, it just kind of, I thought I liked the play on words with the ELD damage, you know, people chasing the clock and getting in too big a hurry, you know, and sometimes maybe not making the curve correctly, or remembering that you have a trailer on, so you got to swing wide. But I just thought that was a kind of a cute way of kind of pointing out one of the challenges that we have, that a lot of people believe we have with the ELDs, because you're chasing every second. And with drivers being paid by the mile instead of the hour, you are constantly saying to yourself, well, the faster I go, you know, the more money I can make. And, you know, most of us are not out here doing it for fun. We want to make a living. And so we have to keep that in mind. And so it's with the ELDs, you know, it's an incentive to go faster. And I find it all the time, you know, if that truck is not set to go as fast as the speed limit, a lot of those guys that are chasing those seconds on the ELDs are going to speed during times you really don't want them to speed. You know, that during the school zones, during the construction zones, things like that, where you should be slowing down to those proper speed limits, but you're chasing that, you know, the almighty dollar, and that's by the second now instead of by the minute or even the 15 minutes, the way it should, you know, it used to be. And I just almost said should be, but yeah, it's still in the back of my mind. And so a guy wasn't so pressed on watching that clock as they are now.
Well, and something else that plays into that's another big issue right now, which is the speed limiters. Because I think we've all seen some folks with speed limited fleets that can't make up time when they're driving on the straightaway, and then they get into one of those areas where the speed limit goes down. And there are people out there that will keep that hammer down and do the maximum speed when they enter something like a construction zone. And you know, I have to say most truckers are very safe and they're very careful of these construction zones, but there are the ones out there that'll just whoosh right through there, and it's just not a good idea.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we got a little bit of time left here, and there's a couple of other topics, and one of them involves these H-2B visas, which are visas that allow workers from other country to come into the United States if there's a shortage of a certain type of worker, things like that. And I guess you've been hearing some stuff about that.
Yeah, there was recently, it was put out that Department of Labor and the Department of Homeland Security, I'm not quite sure how those are combined, but, put out that they're going to offer 65,000 more H-2B visas in 2025. And some of the guys are looking at that as all truck driver jobs that could be lost during that time and bringing over folks from other countries to fill those shoes. And after some discussion on that, and after looking at, into it a little bit, there's very little of those will actually be trucking jobs that they, because that can be, hotel jobs. It can be jobs at resorts, things like that. It's not necessarily trucking, and we are trucking based, so I get the point of protecting the jobs that the Americans have, but when they look at that extra number, I think people look at it and say, "Oh no!" They look at how many people we're losing, as far as how many jobs we're losing out there, and it's not that case. It's not all going into trucking, so we can kind of step back, take a deep breath, and understand that it's not all coming into our industry.
Well, and of course there is a danger there that it could eventually, but you're right. There are many other industries that use these H-2Bs, and that's a total number for all of them. But, it's those people that keep harping on claiming that there's a shortage of drivers in trucking, which there is not. But that's the kind of talk that when it gets to people in D.C. kind of spurs them to think, oh, we must need some of these H-2B visas so we have more people. And it's unnecessary. And it's another reason it's really important for people to talk with the folks who represent them in D.C. and explain what's really going on in the trucking industry, because no one knows better than the drivers.
Absolutely. And you're right. I think we do need to help educate, especially the new folks that are going to Washington, D.C., and even in the state houses. We need to help educate them. And I get it. I'm not the sharpest knife in the Crayola box, but, we need to be able to tell them what we're seeing out here. And the general idea of being a driver shortage out there, it's a supply and demand. If we really had a driver shortage, the rates would be skyrocketing, driver pay would be skyrocketing, but that's not the case, and it's been depressed for a couple of years now. So how does anybody with a straight face say that there's a driver shortage?
Yeah, and of course the reason people that say that within trucking are saying it is because they want to keep hiring drivers cheap. And they want to keep that pipeline flowing because some of them have astounding turnover. I always like to point out that, the average of all turnover in the truckload sectors is around 90%. But there are companies that are good that have very little turnover, which means there's some of them out there to get that average that are closing in on 150 or even 200% annual turnover. And
absolutely,
if you can't treat people well enough to hold them longer than 90 days, maybe you're in the wrong business.
Exactly. You don't deserve that good driver if you aren't willing to take care of them.
There we go. Well, Marty, we've run out of time. Any final words before you ride off into the sunset?
Hey, guys, just be kind to one another and give that guy next to you a break.
Brothers of the highway, children of the wind.
Once again, that was Marty Ellis, who drives OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker. You can find Marty's next stop on our show and every day at our website, landlinenow.com. That includes truck stops, truck shows, and other special events across the country. Again, find that at landlinenow.com. You can also find the Spirit's complete schedule at the OOIDA website, OOIDA.com. Just go to the main menu at the upper left corner of the page and under Membership, click on OOIDA on Tour. That's our show. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome, and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.